All right. So this is kind of an experiment, an audio-visual experiment on how well we can do two things at once. And basically what we're going to try to do is have like a really minimal slideshow. But what I'm going to try to do is do an actual, put a connector on coax for you to see what, how that works. So anyway, we'll see how that works. So to preface the thing, I've been putting connectors on coax for over 40 years, but here's the thing. If you ask somebody what's the best way to, what's the best antenna for 40 meters, you'll get about as many answers to that question as you will to how to put a coax connector on coax. I mean, everybody's got their own little way of doing it, and if you go online, in fact, I've got some references at the end of the slideshow where you can go on and actually watch videos of connectors being soldered on or connectors being crimped on, like Dustin's going to show you after what I show you. So what I'm going to show you is one of the ways I do it and the tools I'm using, and then we'll ask for some questions, and then we'll go into Dustin's presentation. He's going to show you how to do a crimping. I have never done the crimp connector, but having done some of the research for doing this, I watched videos on crimping the connectors on. It's pretty cool, actually. Less soldering, and it actually works pretty well. Okay, so let's see how this works. All right, tools. You need a pair of side cutters, and he doesn't have the camera, the close-up camera going, but I just use a pair of side cutters. You do have it going.
Well, we can't.
Oh, you can't do both. Okay. Anyway, I use side cutters. Lineman's pliers work. These are compound side cutters, which means that they have double the force. So they're really great for cutting through like RG8 coax, you know, RG58 or 8X, which is what I'm working with tonight. It's like cutting butter. The only thing about using cutters on coax is when you cut through them, it squishes the center conductor or the insulator on a center conductor. So you usually have to flatten it out again to make it round again. You guys would probably know what I'm talking about, those of you that have done that before. Coax stripper. You can use a razor blade, you can use a sharp knife. I got this cool little coax stripper that strips, you know, RG8, RG6, RG4, and basically it's got two little cutter blades inside and a spring, and you put it on the coax, and I'll show you. You flip it around about 4 times, open it up, take the coax out, and it cuts the outside shield, the braid, the inside insulator around the center conductor without touching the center conductor, all at one time. And you just peel all that stuff off, and your connector, your cable kind of looks like this, and I'll show you when you get the close-up camera going. So it's pretty cool. Big thing, a couple of big tips. Use the proper size PL259 for the coax you're trying to connect. You know, I didn't know about reducers when I first started this, and I would put RG58 in an RG8 connector. How many of you done that in a pinch? Yeah. It doesn't work. It works great for a while until you happen to pull a little hard on the coax, comes right apart. So, and it's the same thing when Dustin will talk about. You know, there's different sleeves for different size coax, and you have to make sure to use the proper size PL259 coax. Reducers. So tonight I've got an RG8 type PL259. But I'm going to put RG8X inside of that. So I have what's called a little reducer. And I'll show you that when we get to the close-up. Soldering iron, solder, damp sponge. How many guys try to solder without having a sponge? That's okay. How many don't? Bob, thanks, Bob. The thing about a soldering iron that you haven't learned, you know, it's sitting there and it's hot and it oxidizes. And when you go to solder, if you don't clean that tip, every time you're going to have a heck of a time transferring the heat to whatever you're trying to solder. So basically, it's wipe it off, heat it up, wipe it off, get a little solder back on it to kind of tin the tip, and then boom, you can solder just like that. If you try to solder without using a sponge, you'll have a heck of a time.
It'll look like my stuff.
It'll look like Bob's stuff. That wrong way, to the right. All right, so real quick. You square cut the coax, you slip the connector, sleeve, and the adapter over the coax. How many have forgot to do that? Oh man. I have done that so many times. you approximate the strip length, usually about 1.5 inches. Cut the insulation, expose the shield, and a lot of people don't tin the center, and it's kind of you know, an optional thing. If you tin the center conductor, when you go to push the connector on, it's not going to fray on you. So a lot of times you can just tin just the tip, and that way when you go to push your PL259 onto the coax, it won't catch in there and fray. And I don't know, I've done that without doing the tip, and you get it all together and it's shorted and you can't figure out why. Push the reducer into the braid. I'll show you how to do that. You screw it in, solder 1 or 2 braid holes, and I'll show you what that looks like. This is the solder one, remember. Solder the center conductor, you clip it off, and at that point you want to screw the collar up onto the PL259, but if you do that while it's still hot, you'll know it. So I put caution on there. I actually use a little bench vise, and I brought it along to do that. So anyway, this is kind of what I'm going to show you, how I'm going to do it. And you can see there in the first photograph here, I'm kind of sizing where I want to put the tool to strip the coax. Hey, look at this! I slipped the PL259 collar and the reducer, you know, are on the coax. Here's my tool. You can see how I just slip it over the coax. You spin it around about 5 times. That's what it looks like when you take the tool off. It actually stripped the, and I haven't peeled the braid back yet, but here's the braid, cuts the shield, the braid, and without touching the center conductor. And then you screw this into the PL259, so now you can see the reducer here in the background, and then you can see some braid visible through the hole right there. And now the last thing we'll do is go ahead and solder some of the braid in the hole, and then solder, and notice this one I didn't tin it, and then solder the connector, the center. The trick to soldering the center so that it works every time is you angle the PL259 down just a little bit. If you have it tilted up and you go to solder that solder will run right back down into the PL259 and probably short it out or melt some of the stuff inside. So I always angle it down slightly. You can see in this picture in the vise it's angled down. So when you're soldering, solder will follow heat. So if you put the soldering iron, you know, back here, it will actually wick the solder back up into the connector and you'll have a perfect solder joint. Okay? You want to try it? Okay, we're going to try change the video now.
That should, if we're lucky, video. Aha!
Look at that. Probably, okay, get it down. There we go. Looks like we'll have enough light too. All right, so here's my my PL259, my collar, and I'm gonna slip that on right ahead of time, and then my reducer. That's going to go on, and you can tell if you have the right one because they'll fit really tight on the cable. Okay, I'm going to push that back. Now I cheat because on the other end, see I already got the other end off. All right, we'll put this on. Now there's a trick to using these too. By the way, I can go ahead and size this. Remember I showed you kind of like I want it to stick out the end, so I'm going to, it's about 1.5 inches. That's usually typically what it is. And I'm going to slide this in. And if it's too long, that's even better, like right about there. Now the trick I found with these two is if you try to go counterclockwise, it doesn't work. If you go clockwise like this, you can see I'm running around. And you can feel it when it gets to the end, it gets real loose. Pick it up, take it off, slide everything off, and there you have it. Look at that, it actually worked. And notice it actually twisted the center conductor too. Now, one thing I noticed on this particular thing, and I think I damaged it the other day, is that I'm peeling the braid back here, is that I'd like a little more braid exposed than that. So really, what I'd like mine to look like is more, let's take it off, more like this. See, I've got a lot more braid. So all I did is I took a razor blade and I cut that back a little bit. And I'm going to cheat here and slide this back on like that. Everybody can see okay? No comment.
Looks good.
Huh?
Backwards.
No, that's right. Okay, so you slide the, what's backward?
The thing that you were going to blade backwards?
Depends what
He's
you're
using the other end.
Yeah, he's.
I'm using the other end. Yeah, I flipped it around. I cheated.
Oh, okay.
I cheated because I wanted more braid, you know, so now you see I pushed the braid back right there.
It's okay, the first end is forgiving.
What's that?
The first end of the cable is forgiving, the second end is when you got to get it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and tin the tip of this. I have my little sponge here,
A wet sponge.
a wet sponge. Give her a minute to heat up.
You wipe that with your fingers after you.
Yeah.
Jim will be there to help you out.
All right. So basically, I don't know. That's showing up pretty good, huh? All right. So I'm just going to tin this a little bit. And the way to solder is you put the iron on the bottom and touch the solder to the top, and when the wire gets hot enough, it'll pull the solder right through the wire, just like that. Then you go ahead and screw this on. And I see it trying to find the hole. If that wasn't tin, I could possibly fray the end of that. And we're going to go ahead and screw this up into the PL259. Okay, I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the camera, but without some more light, but yeah, maybe. So you can see yeah, it's not going to work, huh? Yeah, if you look, there's at least 2 or 3 holes here that you can see braid through the PL259. So what I'll do now is I'll go ahead and I'll stick it in the vise, aim it down slightly, just about like that.
Give you some light.
Yeah, there we go. Right? So you can probably see it. Maybe turn it so.
Hey, down in front.
God, if it wasn't for me, you guys couldn't see anything.
There it is. All right, so I'm going to heat this up again.
What's the proper wattage to use?
Well, you know, I use
150 watts.
yeah. I use on the bench at home. I was using like a 25 watt iron. It just doesn't get hot enough, fast enough.
This is 100,
So
right?
this thing is probably 100 watt, what, 50 watt maybe?
100, 140 is usually
140 watt.
Yeah.
So it really works great. And you know, the idea is to heat the connector up as least amount as possible. You know, the hotter you get it, the more chance you have of damaging and melting things. So if you have a really hot iron, then things are going to happen a lot faster.
As a s-
And you just push the solder into the connector, and it kind of bubbles out. And that's it, done. And then the other part of it, and this is the wrong kind of solder too. Should use rosin core. This is acid core.
Oh, God.
That's why it's popping. So anyway, similar kind of thing. I don't know if you can see that, but what you'll do is you'll hold you want the solder to go into the braid, so you'll just start heating right here, and then I can't see what I'm doing, but you just drag the solder from the iron onto the connector, and it's going to take a minute to heat the connector a little bit.
How do you not heat the vise?
Yeah, and you solder the vise at the same time. And when it gets hot enough, that you know, the solder will flow onto the connector, and what you're trying to do is get it down into one of the holes.
Anybody get a stopwatch when you start?
Yeah, it you know, there's no rush in it. And
That was at 8:30.
and the thing is you know, if you don't have a hot enough soldering iron, touching the connector takes the heat away from the soldering iron too. Thank you, Bob. I think that. Anyway, you get the picture. So anyway, I'll solder a couple holes, and that's about all that's needed. And then take the other part of it. Mine's rolled off the table there somewhere. There it is. Yeah, it was behind the vise. Take the sleeve, and of course I'm cheating because I don't have an end of a cable here. But
A lot more work when you got a 100-foot cable and you forgot to put it out.
yeah, and then you just basically. Ouch. I told you.
It works, huh?
I told you.
He didn't get that on camera, do it again.
Yeah. And I kind of goobered up the threads here too because I couldn't see what I was doing. But anyway, I think you get the picture. The other thing that you can do is if you want to reuse the connector, which I will. I didn't cut the end of it off either. Basically, you want to get this over here. Cut the end of it off like that. What you can do is grab the connector with a pair of pliers and heat it up real hot, and then take the big end, the open end, and bang it on something hard, and all the solder will just come right out of it. So you can use that over and over again. If you do something wrong, just do it over again. Questions? I think Brian had a good tip. Oh, I did your tip, didn't I? I soldered the center conductor.
No, sometimes what I'll do is I'll lay the braid over the insert and just do a little bit of solder around the braid so the braid holds together. Because I found especially if I have shorter braids, when I tighten that connector in, it will sometimes stand the braids up and you'll have a short circuit. And so if you put just a little bit of solder around the tip of the braid, when you tighten it up, it won't flare back up and short out.
Is there a way to clean old fittings?
Oh, what?
Old fittings, where they kind of tarnished over the years?
I use steel wool.
Still look.
Yeah, steel wool works. And
Ketchup, ketchup's a mild acid, vinegar.
yeah,
Yeah.
if
Ketchup works great. Let's sit with the ketchup for, take the ketchup packet from McDonald's,
I was trying to clean up my bad solder joint here.
It comes out nice and clean. Works on rockets too.
Tip from the back.
Anyway, use rosin core solder because acid core solder is
Yeah, don't use acid.
pretty nasty. All right.
Yeah, hey, way in the back here, the cheap seats. If you buy connectors that have PTFE insulators in them, you definitely want to do that because if you buy the cheap stuff, maybe polyethylene, they'll melt.
Thank you.
Or baked light.
Yeah, or big one. And the other thing, I always put, like you pre-tinned the center conductor. I actually pre-tin the main barrel and let it cool off and then assemble it, because then you get solder flow.
One of the videos actually did that. They tinned all the braid, and then they tinned the barrel, and they let it cool, and when they put it together, it soldered pretty quickly. So another little trick. I was going to mention about connectors. Thank you for bringing that up. These come in the PL259s come in various varieties. You can get the cheapos for about $1 a piece. They have a phenolic center. It's kind of a brown center. Those are cheap. They work for a while. They're not really good. And the problem with them is when you heat them up, that phenolic, I think, shrinks, and they'll actually pull out after a while, depending on how many times you're unplugging. So you want to get the white ones. They're white, and that's Teflon, and that won't melt, and it'll last forever. They're about $2.50 to $3 a piece. If you go to one of the swap meets, like Pacificon, you can get them for $2 a piece. I usually buy like a 10-pack or something. But get the Teflon ones. They're white on the inside. Then you know they're Teflon.
And the Teflon won't melt.
And the Teflon will not melt. Yeah.
And not all white ones are Teflon, by the way.
Oh, really? So you have to make sure they are.
If you can afford it, buy the silver plated, they sell.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing too. Silver plated. The ones I have up here are silver
Save
plated
you a lot of
too.
grief.
Yeah, and the silver plating helps the solder flow really quickly too. So there you go. Dustin, your turn.
Okay. So, versions for crimping is about the same. You're going to use the same tools that Dennis is using for preparation. I didn't have the fancy cutter that he has, the one where you can spin it clockwise or counterclockwise. I just used an X-Acto knife because it's what I have. Quick note before this, it says shrink tubing. I prefer shrink tubing that has the glue on the inside. And I didn't know that existed until I randomly found it at Home Depot. And so if you're using LMR 400, they make, was it like 1/2 inch or 5/8 to 3/8 shrink tubing that has the glue on the inside, and that stuff is beautiful. Once it glues on there, it's all sealed up and good to go.
And there's another brand that they make for marine usage that you will never get off.
So if you want to really permanently glue it together and then never use it or take it apart, that's the stuff you want.
But Home Depot carries it?
Home Depot carries, yeah, Home Depot carries the stuff that I bought. It's just in their electrical department, and you're gonna look for this, it comes in like a 3-pack, about 6-inch section, something like that. And it's going to say, heat shrink tubing. I think the size that I bought was 5/8 to 3/8, or 3/8 to 5/8, whichever way you wanna look at that. And then it has glue on the inside that is heat activated. And so you just put it all together like you normally would for,
Is that inside diameter or outside?
well, it depends.
How much you need?
Starting diameter somewhere in there. Let's see. So, essentially, you follow most of the same steps as Dennis for preparation. You're going to want to square cut your end of it, which I actually don't know if that's super necessary for the crimp ones. You want to make sure that your inside cut on your insulator is square. The tip will just be hanging out, and you're trimming that off after you solder it anyway, so that first initial cut can be kind of rough. We can move to, okay. I'm gonna skip that stuff, I'm gonna move to pictures. So, like Dennis had, this, do I have a laser pointer with this thing? Yes.
Middle button.
Center button? Center button, okay. So this is the ferrule part that gets crimped. There is your heat shrink, and that is the thread-on part of the outside of the PL259. Slide them all on first, obviously, because there is no getting them back on otherwise. And I forgot to put on heat shrink tubing on one of my cables, and so electrical tape. Not as pretty. So, initial start. I measure from about here, and I have the shakes, about here on the unit, and I just take the actual connector and lay it next to my coax and use that as a measuring tool. I'm not going to take a tape measure or anything like that. When I started this, I wanted to make sure I could do this over and over again without having to remember dimensions. So I'm using what I have as my tools and my measuring specifications. So I cut right about here, like so. And that leaves me with enough inside conductor to make sure that I make it out the end of your connector. Just overshoot that because it's going to be worth it in the long run. I mean, not by like inches, but make sure you have enough, because if you come up short, you're going to wonder whether you did it right. Second is, because this is about where the, on the inside of your connector, where the insulation or your PTFE is, you can use that spot at the same time. The other way that I did it was I just took like a little feeler gauge, stuck it in there, pulled that out, cut that same amount here. So you can see this is the end of the connector to about in there. That's how much braid you want exposed. You don't want more than that, you don't want less than that. Now, the other thing about this is that there is actually more braid. So you see the knurled part here? That is actually the only part that gets crimped. So in essence, anything from this point forward of the braid is excess, but the benefit is, you'll see later, it's going to be to your benefit to cut excess braid on there, or show excess braid. So then what you want to do is you want to flare this out. Now what I used was I just used the X-Acto knife, and I went around it and flared it out. And you don't want to peel it. The way that I did it, I didn't want to peel it back, and I found that it was beneficial not to peel it all apart and have the whole braid come apart. You want it to stay as braided as possible. But you want it back far enough that it's not going to get caught and possibly cause a short. Then you're going to slip your connector down inside that. Now this is where, I'll go back one. This center insulator, the white plastic part here, you don't want it too long, and you're going to know if it's too long because in this picture, when you shove your connector in, the bottom of it should be right about here, and it should squish. You don't want it to squish in underneath of the axle of the outside shield. You want it to come up and just meet it, because if you push it too far in there, it's going to create a bulge, and you know that you've gone too far because your crimp barrel will not slide over it. So then you got to back out a little bit. Once you've got to this point, ugly but effective, I slide the barrel up, and this is where you're going to know that everything is fitting together. And then you go ahead and crimp it. And the reason there's the extra shielding sticking out is so that I knew that everything fit on there, and there was plenty of shielding up underneath of that that was definitely getting crimped on there. I didn't want to be short and have it somewhere in there and then that part pull out. Once I've crimped it on there, I just took the X-Acto knife, it's copper, you've got stainless steel X-Acto knives, and just run around the outside of it, and all that shielding just falls away, just like giving it a haircut. You can either, before you crimp it on, so in this stage or maybe this stage, if you're super sure that that's where you want it, go ahead and solder the tip in there. Otherwise, I waited until I made sure that the outside was solid, because this goes back to the reason why you cut that center conductor long is after you've made all your other connections or all your other measurements and crimping and everything, that center conductor might move a little bit, but since you cut it long, even if it pulled back into the connector, it didn't pull too far. It didn't disappear on you. Slide up your shrink, slide up your parts, and you're done. So let me grab the crimping tool.
How long did you?
I actually did one of these. I timed it, and I got it about 4 minutes. So I was able to do the whole thing, crimp it in about 4 minutes. This is your crimping tool, or this is the one that I have. Essentially, when you get to this point, you slide the tool up around the little barrel, this guy here, and then you squeeze down, and this thing will only release once it reaches its correct dimensions. So you know that you've done it right. If you get to here and it doesn't pop back out, you know that you haven't gone far enough. This has enough leverage to it that you can set it on a table and lean on it if you need to. Otherwise, it's pretty easy by hand. But yeah, you get to here, crimp, and then everything's pretty much solid, and then you solder, and you're done. Question?
That tool have a different jig for like 8X and all
Yes.
that?
So Jim brought in his version. I happen to only have 2 of them. I have this one and then one for like RG8 or something size. This one is sized for basically LMR 400 and 213, something that is around the, what is it, 480 or 460 diameter.
Yeah.
That's what this one's sized for. Jim has every single other one but this size. So,
What is the cost of the tool?
Retail is about $3.99.
That's
You
not
can get it
$3.99. It's not $3.99.
No.
That's the complete set, but
Well, the
how much?
die is separate. That's just the tool. The dies are anywhere from $74 to $89.
so that's the fancy versions here. Now, I got lucky and found both of mine in a junk bin, free. So, hence the reason I went with crimping. Now, given if you have generous friends that will let you borrow these, don't consider that part of the cost. I know that I priced them out, different places have them $70 for tool and dies. I'm not going to say that they're amazing, I've never tried them. I'm not going to also say that they're like terrible, so everybody seems to like them. These ones are the commercial versions, and there's a reason for that.
I use a Paladin, and that I think it's only like $70, and
Yeah.
and it locks, and it's good enough. It doesn't go quite the length of handles, and it even does power pulls. So you have to buy the die
Right,
separately.
and I was looking at those, and I really liked those for their versatility.
I like it a lot.
You get the power. So what he's talking about is that there's a version that, like, I don't know, I could reference DX Engineering sells it, and they have just different inserts, and you can change it out to do power poles or do coax or stuff like that. Very versatile tool. If you were going to buy one, probably buy that kind of a style. These are great for professional use, whatever, and if you find them in a junk drawer, they're the right price. But otherwise, they're anodized is the only difference I really see. Yeah, I lucked out on this. I would say that the kind of you were talking about is pretty good for everybody.
Are all the crimp connectors the shorter barrel threaded in? Just,
I think that
other ones actually will go farther than will
right. It depends on the type of crimp that you're getting.
The short one.
I'm mainly just discussing process, but yeah, I understand what you want, the barrels that are longer, more
Yeah.
grip to them. I don't know if I've seen any of those, but I'm not gonna say they don't exist.
There's shorter ones, there's really narrow ones.
Right.
Right.
And you can get them in different lengths. They're available, longer ones that look more like the solder ones. They are-
Right, yeah. Somebody makes it, I guarantee.
Got it. Thank you.
The versions that I used here, these ones are from DX Engineering. I don't mean to sound like a spokesman for them, I'm not being endorsed by them, but they made a very inexpensive quality product, and that's what I've used here. They're,
How much is each?
I was gonna say I think they're like $4 to $6, somewhere in that range. So comparable to the rest of the connectors out there, kind of thing. Just you don't have to do the solder, you just and done. And I've yanked on these. Now, being that the center is soldered, that's where a lot of your strength comes from, and then also the crimping is pretty strong as well. And I can't say that I've hung off of it, but I would say that it's been hung up in a tree and done just fine. Any other questions? I'll take Brian.
Well, this all came about because we were on the radio and I was talking to Dennis about what is the best connector, because I came into this and I threw away more connectors than I made good ones to learn how to do this. So I asked Dennis, what's the best way to put on a connector? Because we've all seen all these YouTube videos. And so that's how it started. But then Dustin was listening into our conversation and said, hey, I don't solder, I crimp. So my question to them is, and maybe we could address this, which method is better? One is definitely probably less expensive.
That's my primary reason I do soldering. I don't want to spend money for the tool. I think it's a great way to do it. I think the crimping is a great way to do it.
Okay.
But I mean, it's just the cost of the connector, basically.
Yeah. I would say that crimping is just ease of use.
Yeah.
Speed and ease of use
I
kind of
can
thing.
give you another perspective. In aerospace, we accept the contracts so often, especially to say one or the other for a specific contract, but for satellites, rockets, shuttle, we use both types. And we don't worry too much about one being less reliable.
I know if you buy cable with the connectors already on it, you can specify solder on or crimped on too.
Right.
Maybe just a show of hands. How many people use crimp on, prefer crimp?
Well, I use both.
Okay. And how many prefer solder?
That's a
50-50
50-50
split.
right there.
And so that's, yeah, or both, yeah. Okay.
Greg has a question down here. Greg, go ahead.
A request
Yes.
for an encore. End connectors. An encore, do end connectors.
And connectors.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment that you can do that for end connectors and BNCs and SMAs and.
Yeah, for NBNC, I have a strong preference for crimps.
Oh yeah, me too.
Yeah, both NBNC, I
That's a little different.
print. You can do them a lot
They're just
faster,
too tiny.
and you can be much more sharp.
So this evening, I knew that everybody had a preference, one way or the other. And so I just wanted to have them give us a presentation this evening and kind of maybe show us something that we're not used to working with as an option. So if you want to just kind of wrap.
I'm just going to say, just to summarize, this whole presentation will be up on Groups.io in PDF form so you can download it. And it has both the step-by-step on both of ours plus a sequence photos. So you can kind of see and look at what it looks like printed together. And at the end of the, in fact, let's see, at the end of the presentation, there's sequence photos. And there we go. So there's also videos you can click on in the link in the download, and that'll get you to both the solder type and the crimp type. And everybody does it just a little tiny bit different, you know. And just watching the videos, you'll pick up a lot of little tricks, like tilting the PL259 down a little bit when you're soldering the center, you know, that kind of thing. You know, if you're not paying attention and you just chasing it around your bench, you know how many of you do that? You know, you're trying to do that. Buy yourself a little vise like I have there, a little vacuum vise, and it'll hold it just at the right angle, and you'll get a perfect solder every time.
I brought in examples of crimps, so if anybody wants to see the actual connectors before they've gone on, and then some finished cables, they're over on the table.
Yeah, come up and take a look at the tools and stuff too. So, thank you.
Thanks, guys.